uh, have they ceded power to the European Union? Have they ceded representation to the European Union? I don't believe so. I know if I lived there, I would never have done so. I would, and I always will, insist instead on assurances of my sovereign rights to representation, which include uh, eradication of any and every possible crime, not only against myself, but against any other person. Now, we are definitely wrong if we fail to realize that something is wrong here. And if we don't reach ourselves for its roots, we're apart. We become apart because of our disinterest is a license, in effect, for a persistence in a denial of representation or a failure to represent at best, an ineptitude of government at very best, if not an entirely corrupt government. And so this is what is disturbing to me. Mr. Batten had called for the troops to be brought home from Afghanistan and Iraq because they were just making Tony Blair a millionaire, and he was insisting that they be applied to suppress the insurrection, as Mr. Howe had termed it, all about London. Well, I would prefer, of course, to see the violence go away, vanish immediately. But the only way that that's going to happen is if we solve the root problems here. If we continue to deny people hope, then we are part of the problem. So it isn't about troops and bullets. It's about solution, and it's about delivering solution in a timely manner. That is, without any resistance, with full interest in a possibility of solution. So I'm unhappy that Mr. Batten hasn't come on the show. There's been a number of other people that we've tried to bring on to the program, and we're trying to reach Darcus Howe ourselves. There's a lady that, young lady, and I think she's 24. Her name is Lori Penny. She has a blog, well-read blog called Penny Read. We're trying to bring these people on the program so that we can get testimony of the people, and I'm hoping to propose mathematically perfected economy to these people in the midst of an interview, to get their reaction, to see where they're at, in regard to their perceptions of what the voice of the people are. Now, my brother, one of my brothers, had suggested something the other day as a possible topic for a program, and it was a good suggestion, and it was a poll that was posted recently by, just in the last few days, I believe, by WorldNet Daily. And this poll is it attempts to reach down to the roots of the issues before us. the title of the poll, or the question of the poll, is who is most responsible for America's current financial crisis? Let's talk about the title just a moment. America's current financial crisis. Well, you have made the so-called dollar, which of course is a lie. The dollar constitutionally is defined as so many grains of silver or gold. Nothing but that can be a dollar by constitutional definition, although, of course, as we've often explained, the faults of the gold or silver or precious metal monetary standard are that in restricting a circulation to a relatively finite set of resources, which are a tiny subset of all resources, you deny the people reward or evidence of reward for their production. And this is a severe crime against us, which of course needs to be rectified. But in obfuscating the currency, which is comprised of promissory obligations, into a falsified debt or falsified debts, subject to an unwarranted imposition of interest, which precipitates in this implicit obligation, which I've explained over and over again, to maintain a vital circulation, which in turn then results in our need to borrow principal and interest back into circulation as an ever-increasing sum of falsified debt until we suffer a terminal sum of falsified debt. In this obfuscation, we have the very explanation for terminal failure, which is not a terminal failure which has been imposed just upon America. It isn't just America's current financial crisis. It's a global financial crisis, as is already precipitated in the first Great Depression. And so we are now in the midst of a second Great Depression, which will manifest to a far, far, far more serious and severe extent, as I've explained, when these methods of artificial sustention or artificial extension of the lifespan of a finite lifespan beyond its terminus, its legitimate terminus, in which creditworthiness to borrow further is destroyed, and we have no legitimate power even to maintain a vital circulation under this implicit obligation to borrow principal and interest back into circulation as a greater sum of debt. And the reason, of course, which our creditworthiness is destroyed inherently and inevitably, completely, in the end of the lifespan of the system is because we've already assumed a sum of debt which is terminal under this this process of perpetually escalated borrowing, as is necessary merely to maintain a vital circulation. Now, people don't want to believe that that borrowing has been imposed upon us as a necessity. They want to. Many people understand it, but there are a number of people who would just say, "No, we're borrowing too much. We can just stop." Well, it doesn't take much critical thinking to examine that possibility that we could just, or proposition that we could just stop borrowing further somehow and not assume further and further and further escalations of debt, even beyond terminal sums of debt. Everything you see the governments of the world doing today is a further borrowing. When the Federal Reserve publishes more evidence of promissory obligations to buy federal bonds, what's it doing? It's merely publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to repay those bonds, complete with whatever dividends and purported value of maturation is involved. So we're paying debts subject to interest, falsified debts to a mere publisher of evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, which debts are multiplied over. Obviously, if government needed money, it could publish it itself on behalf of the people, because we have no purpose or object in multiplying our costs to ourselves. You see, so the central banking systems of the which have been imposed upon the world are nothing but criminals against us. They provide us nothing, and they take and they take and they take to an ever-escalating degree by this obfuscation of the currency, which requires reflation of every circulation in the world, not just of the United States. So this is wrong, this question. America's current financial crisis. You can't segregate America's current financial crisis from the rest of the world, particularly as the Federal Reserve note, or this obfuscation of the currency in the Federal Reserve note, has been imposed upon the world as the, quote, reserve currency, unquote, of the world. Most of us have no idea what that means or what the ramifications of it are. But in truth, what it amounts to is that every currency in the world is obfuscated. It's an obfuscation of of the people's promissory obligations to each other into, first, a falsified debt to the purported banking system, which doesn't represent any legitimate warranted property of the banking system at all, which banking system merely publishes evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. And then, of course, as if this property were property of the banking systems or our promissory obligations to each other, by which I mean these are obligations to each other, a promissory obligation being as the real creditor who gives up property for the promissory obligation is paid in full from the outset. The remaining obligation is to maintain the integrity of the promissory obligation, which therefore is indeed to pay for the property, but to retire the principal as it's paid. So, in truth, all we need to do is restore the rightful state of promissory obligations to an unobfuscated state. We need to eradicate banking. This would give these people demonstrating around London hope. So, and it's our only hope. Rectitude is our only hope. So if we're not protesting for hope, we're not protesting for anything. To demonstrate just by destructiveness, and I'm not saying that people are, but to do so is destructive to any legitimate cause. Therefore, what we really need to see is that the voice of the people is a calm and irrational voice, which isn't beating up teenagers and robbing them of a few belongings, on the streets by bigger and more numerous teenagers. This isn't going to change the world for the better. So without a voice, when you deny a voice to the people, is why these events manifest and fester as they do. So this question at the WorldNet Daily poll, who is most responsible for America's current financial crisis, nonetheless is really the question that we need to be asking across the world. So this is a multiple choice poll, and I'll give the possible answers. I don't know. No one in particular. It's just the natural cycle of economics. George W. Bush, Tea Partiers, Republicans in Congress, Wall Street, greedy corporations, the Federal Reserve,